On Thanksgiving, you're supposed to be grateful for family. But as I stood in the snow, looking at my grandson freezing on the porch while my daughter's family feasted inside, I realized I wasn't grateful. I was furious, and I was about to end this party for good. This is the story of how a perfect family dinner became a crime scene. Stick around to see justice served cold. The phone call came 2 days before Thanksgiving, finding me in the sanctuary of my workshop. The air inside was thick with the ghosts of trees, the sharp, clean scent of pine, the richer, almost sweet smell of freshly sanded oak. It mingled with the faint, acidic aroma of old coffee from the pot in the corner. I was working on a small rocking chair, trying to coax a stubborn mortise and tenon joint into a perfect, seamless union. My hands, mapped with the calluses and scars of 40 years as a carpenter, moved with a patience the rest of my body had long forgotten. Martha, my late wife, always claimed I could hear the wood whispering its secrets. Perhaps I could, once. These days, the silence she left behind is the loudest sound in the room. My phone, a sleek black rectangle that always looked out of place amongst the hand tools and wood shavings, began to buzz. Its vibration against a stack of Douglas fir was a jarring, modern intrusion. The screen lit up with a picture of Chloe, my daughter, smiling a smile from 3 summers ago. I swiped to answer. "Hey, Dad, you doing okay?" Her voice was thin, stretched taut like a high-tension wire. It was a voice I'd started hearing more and more often. The voice she used when she was carefully navigating a conversation, just wrestling with some stubborn oak. "Honey, it's got a mind of its own today. You all set for the big day? Don't tell me you forgot the secret ingredient for the pumpkin pie again." I tried to keep my tone light, a familiar joke between us. A small, nervous laugh fluttered through the speaker. It didn't quite land. No, I've got it under control. I have a list. Actually, that's why I was calling. About Thursday. I stopped sanding. My hand rested on the smooth, unfinished arm of the rocking chair. I already knew, with a sinking certainty that had become as familiar as the grain of the wood beneath my fingers, what was coming. I'd known since she'd married Mark. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "Well, Mark and I were talking, and you know it's such a long drive for you. It's nearly 5 hours, and the news is forecasting a big snowstorm moving in Wednesday night. We don't want you out on those roads, taking any risks. Your safety is the most important thing to us." The words sounded rehearsed, coached. In the background, I heard his voice, muffled but carrying the sharp, authoritative tone that never seemed to leave him. "Just be direct. Chloe, he'll understand. We're doing this for his own good." Chloe's voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial, almost a whisper. "We were thinking, maybe it's best if you stay home and stay safe this year. We can set up the laptop at the dinner table and do a video call. It'll be just like you're here with us." Just like you're here. The phrase echoed in the cavernous silence of my workshop. I looked around the room at the chair I was making for my youngest granddaughter, at the neat rows of tools on the wall, at the empty space where Martha's potting bench used to be. I thought of my grandson, Caleb. He'd be 18 now, legally a man, but still just a kid in my eyes. A quiet, thoughtful kid who seemed to shrink a little more every time I saw him. "I see," I said. The words felt like sawdust in my mouth. And this was Mark's idea, wasn't it? A beat of silence. I could almost hear the frantic calculations happening on her end. It was a joint decision. Dad, we're a team. And as a team, we're just worried about you. Right. Worried. I picked up a worn-out rag and began wiping the sawdust from my hands. A pointless, methodical motion. Well, do you tell Mark, I appreciate his deep concern for my well-being. You all have a good Thanksgiving. You hear. I ended the call before she could deploy another round of carefully constructed apologies. It wasn't anger I felt. Not the hot, quick-burning kind. It was a cold, heavy grief. The feeling of a door, one I'd helped build and hang, being gently but firmly locked from the inside. That's why, at the crack of dawn on Thanksgiving morning, I was turning the key in the ignition of my old Ford F-150. The drive from my quiet patch of Michigan down to Cincinnati is a long meditation in gray. The highway unspools like a ribbon of asphalt through flat time. Frozen farmland. The skeletal remains of cornstalks sticking up through a thin layer of snow. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, spitting a fine, wet sleet that the wipers could barely keep up with. Any sane man my age would be at home, watching the weather report with a mug of hot coffee. But my mind wasn't on the road. It was on Martha. She had treated Thanksgiving with the reverence of a high, holy day. For her, it was the family's anchor. Life tries to pull everyone apart. Wendell, she'd say, her hands covered in flour as she kneaded dough. Jobs, distance, silly arguments. Thanksgiving is the anchor that holds us fast, so nobody drifts too far out to sea. I felt like I was drifting, and a deep, paternal instinct, a gut feeling I'd learned never to ignore, told me Caleb was drifting even further out. On the passenger seat, protected from the slush on my boots, was a cardboard box. Inside, a brand new Wilson, a 2000 baseball glove, was nestled in tissue paper, its leather smelling of possibility and summer afternoons. It was the kind of glove I'd always wanted as a kid. It was a rite of passage. Underneath it, a carefully curated stack of Silver Age comic books, the birth of the Fantastic Four. Some early, angst-ridden, Spider-Man issues, each one pristine in its protective sleeve. It was our language, a shared universe that existed just for us. I pressed my foot a little harder on the gas. The old truck's engine whined in protest. But it was a loyal beast. It held the road. By the time I navigated the off-ramp into Chloe's subdivision, the sleet had turned to thick, wet flakes of snow, the kind that swallows sound and makes the world feel brand new. It was a neighborhood built on the promise of the American dream, tidy two-story colonials, identical but for the color of their shutters, sat on perfectly squared-off lots. Inflatable turkeys and pilgrims bobbled on lawns under the fresh blanket of white. It was an illusion of perfect, manufactured harmony. Their house was at the end of the cul-de-sac, every window blazing with a warm, buttery light that promised laughter and warmth and abundance within. A festive wreath hung on the deep blue door. A cheerful splash of life against the monochrome landscape. I could smell it from the truck, the rich, savory scent of roasting turkey and herbs. A wave of profound relief washed over me. So powerful it made me feel weak. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just a lonely old man, inventing dramas to fill the quiet spaces in my life. I pulled the truck to the curb and killed the engine. The world went utterly silent. The only sound, the soft hiss of snowflakes landing on the windshield. I sat there for a long minute, a peace treaty forming in my mind. I would go in, surprise them, and accept their apologies for being overprotective. I would laugh it off. We would be a family. That's when I saw him. At first, my brain didn't process it. It was just an anomaly in the perfect picture. A dark shape. A discarded bundle of laundry. Huddled on the top step of the pristine porch. I squinted. The shape moved. It was a person, a boy. He was tucked into a tight ball. Arms wrapped around his shins. Head bowed, as if in prayer. It was Caleb. A cold dread. Far colder than the winter air. Seeped into my bones. I threw the truck door open and stepped out. The 40-degree air was a slap in the face. Sharp and biting in my lungs. And Caleb was wearing a t-shirt. A thin, faded Marvel t-shirt and a pair of worn jeans. As I walked across the snow-covered lawn, each crunch of my boots an explosion in the silence. The horrifying details came into focus. The violent, uncontrollable shivering that shook his entire frame. The raw, red skin of his arms, pebbled with goosebumps. The distinct, terrifying blue tint of his lips. From 10 feet away, I could hear the wet, desperate chatter of his teeth. My heart hammered against my ribs. A wild bird trapped in a cage. My gaze lifted from my freezing grandson to the large picture window beside the front door. Inside was a portrait of warmth and happiness. A Rockwell painting. I saw Chloe, my daughter, raising a glass of red wine. Her head tilted back in laughter at something her husband had just said. I saw Mark, standing at the head of a table groaning with food. A magnificent turkey glistening before him. He held a carving knife like a scepter. A benevolent king presiding over his domain. I saw their little girl, Emmy, my granddaughter, coloring happily at a small table. Soft music drifted through the glass. The scene was so perfect, so utterly, profanely normal, that it felt like a hallucination. The world tilted on its axis. My reality split in two, the cold, brutal truth of my grandson freezing on the porch, and the warm, comfortable lie being performed just a few feet away. I didn't knock. Shouting seemed pointless. I walked up the 3 steps, my boots heavy as lead. Caleb didn't look up. He may not have even been able to. I put my gloved hand on the polished brass doorknob. It was locked. A surge of pure, white-hot adrenaline flooded my system. All thought, all reason, evaporated, replaced by a single, primal instinct: get him inside. I took 1 step back, planted my left foot, and drove my right foot forward with all the force my 67-year-old body could muster. I was wearing my steel-toed Red Wing work boots. The impact wasn't a crack, it was a detonation. The door jamb splintered. The lock assembly exploded. And the heavy oak door flew inward, crashing against the interior wall with a sound that shook the house. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, it all ceased in an instant. What the hell is wrong with you people? The roar tore from my lungs, the voice of a stranger. I stood in the gaping doorway, a ragged hole in their perfect world. Snow and wind swirling in behind me. Chloe's face drained of all color, becoming a waxy, horrified mask. The wine glass she was holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the pristine hardwood floor. A splash of crimson against the pale wood. Mark froze. The carving knife held midair. His expression wasn't fear. It was outrage. The fury of a tyrant whose sanctum had been breached. This is a private residence. Wendell, he said, his voice dangerously low and controlled. You are trespassing. I paid him no mind. I turned, gently putting my hands on Caleb's shoulders. He was stiff, his muscles locked from the cold. I guided him inside, into the shocking wave of heat, and sat him down in a plush armchair. I ran back out to the truck, my heart pounding, and grabbed the thick wool blanket I always kept behind the seat for emergencies. When I returned, the tableau was unchanged. Mark, a statue of indignation. Chloe, a pillar of salt. I wrapped the heavy blanket around Caleb's shaking frame, tucking it in tightly. Why? I said, my voice a low growl. Never taking my eyes off. Chloe, why was he outside? She wouldn't look at me. Her eyes darted to her husband, then to the floor, then back to the spreading stain of wine. Finally, she mumbled a string of words so absurd, so monstrously out of proportion, that my brain refused to accept them. He burnt the crust on the turkey. The crust on the turkey. I stared at her, then at the golden brown bird on the table, then back at my grandson, whose skin was still mottled and pale. The disconnect was so profound it felt like a form of madness. I glanced at the digital clock on the cable box. 4:17 p.m. I'd been on the road since the morning. I'd heard Chloe's voice just after noon. How long? I asked. My own voice, now a whisper. Chloe, how long has he been out there? It was Caleb who answered, his voice a hoarse, rattling croak from deep within the blanket. Since right after you called. Mom. He said, I ruined it. He said, I had to think about what I did. My blood turned to ice in my veins. 4 hours. More than 4 hours. He had forced my grandson to sit outside in a freezing snowstorm for over 4 hours. As a punishment for slightly overcooking a piece of poultry, my gaze drifted slowly from Caleb's pale face to Mark's smug one. As I did, my eyes snagged for a second on the house across the street. On the neighbor's doorframe, a small, dark circle was mounted, a silent, black eye, watching everything. A doorbell camera, a witness. The thought was there, and then gone, buried under the immediate, crushing weight of the present. I took a deep, steadying breath and faced my son-in-law. The rage was still there, a churning inferno in my gut. But my voice, when it came out, was cold and solid as river stone. You are going to apologize to that boy. I said. It was not a request. Right now. Mark actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. He placed the carving knife down on the platter with theatrical slowness in the rana, the clink of steel on ceramic echoing in the tense silence. He crossed his thick arms over his chest, a smirk of absolute confidence spreading across his face. I don't apologize for discipline, he said, his eyes boring into mine, challenging me. This is my house. My rules. My rules. The words hung in the superheated air of the dining room, thick and oily like smoke. For a moment, nobody moved. It was a tableau of domestic warfare, Mark. The smug tyrant behind his fortress of a dining table, Chloe. A statue carved from fear, frozen by the shattered wine glass at her feet, and Caleb, a ghost wrapped in wool, shivering from a cold that had sunk deeper than his skin. My own hands were clenched so tight I could feel my fingernails biting into my palms. A small, sharp pain that kept the roaring in my head from completely taking over. I saw the flicker of triumph in Mark's eyes. He thought he'd won. He thought a loud voice and a declaration of ownership were enough to end this. He had mistaken my silence for submission. He didn't know that the quietest moments are often the most dangerous. Without another word to him, I turned my back. It was a deliberate, calculated dismissal. I focused all my attention on the only person who mattered. "Come on, son," I said, my voice softer now, but with an undercurrent of steel he couldn't miss. "Let's get you properly warmed up." I helped Caleb to his feet. He was unsteady, leaning on me with a weight that felt alarmingly slight for a boy his age. We walked past the feast on the table. The smell of rosemary and roasted meat, now turning my stomach. We walked past my daughter, who flinched as if I might strike her but still didn't move. We walked right past Mark, so close I could feel the heat of his indignant rage. And we went up the stairs. The upstairs bathroom was clean, sterile, and impersonal, like a room in a hotel. White towels were folded with geometric precision. A decorative soap sat untouched in a dish. I turned the shower knob, and after a moment of sputtering, hot water began to gush out, steaming up the mirror and filling the small room with a life-giving warmth. "Get in there," I told Caleb gently. "Stay as long as you need. Just let the water warm you through to the bone." He nodded, his movements still stiff and slow. As he shed the damp t-shirt, I saw them, faded, ugly bruises, the color of old lemons and faint violets, circled his upper arms. Fingerprints, the marks of being grabbed, of being dragged. The sight sent a fresh wave of black fury through me. So intense it made me dizzy. I wanted to go back downstairs and take a hammer to that perfect dining room table. I wanted to shatter more than just a door. But I looked at Caleb's face, at the downcast eyes and the hollows under his cheekbones, and I knew that rage was a luxury I couldn't afford. He didn't need a storm. He needed a harbor. I closed the bathroom door to give him privacy and stepped into his bedroom across the hall. The rage in my chest cooled, replaced by a profound and aching sadness. The room was a cell, a neat, tidy, personality-free cell. There were no posters on the walls, no books scattered on the nightstand, no mess of clothes or hobby equipment that should define an 18-year-old's space. The bed was made with military precision, the blanket thin and worn. It was the room of someone trying to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible, to offer no pretext for punishment. I sat on the edge of the hard mattress, the springs groaning in protest. I could hear the steady drumming of the shower next door. I waited. This was a different kind of carpentry, the slow, patient work of mending something that had been broken from the inside out. After a long time, the water shut off. A few minutes later, Caleb emerged, wrapped in a large white towel, his hair dripping. The steam had brought some color back to his face, but it couldn't touch the exhaustion in his eyes. I handed him a set of clean, dry clothes I'd found in a drawer, a thick sweatshirt and sweatpants. He took them without a word and disappeared back into the bathroom. When he came back out, he looked less like a ghost, but no less haunted. He wouldn't look at me. Instead, focusing on a loose thread on the sleeve of his sweatshirt. I didn't push. I just sat there. A quiet, unmovable presence. It wasn't just tonight. He finally whispered. The words were so quiet. I almost missed them. My heart ached. I know. Son. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a misery so deep it felt ancient. He started after you guys moved. After Grandma. After she was gone. It was small things at first. If I left a dish in the sink, I wouldn't get dessert. If my grade slipped from an A to a B, he'd take my phone for a week. He paused, swallowing hard. Then it got worse. The garage, if I forgot to take out the trash, he'd make me spend the night in the garage. In the winter, too, he'd give me one blanket. I'd try to sleep in the car, but it was just as cold. I could smell the gasoline and the fertilizer, and I'd just lie there, shivering, waiting for the sun to come up. I didn't speak. I just listened, my entire being focused on him. I was building a container with my silence, to a safe place for him to pour this poison into. The basement is for when I talk back, he continued, his voice flat and monotone, as if he were reciting a list of facts about someone else. It's damp down there. It smells like mold. He locks the door from the outside. The longest was 2 days. Mom would sneak me down some water and crackers when he was at work. The thought of my daughter, my Chloe, reduced to scurrying around her own home like a mouse, smuggling scraps to her imprisoned son, was a fresh knife in my gut. He told her that if I ever told anyone, he'd leave her. Caleb's voice cracked, and the first tear traced a path down his cheek. He'd take Emmy. He'd tell everyone she was an unfit mother. He'd make sure she was homeless. And he told me. He told me it would all be my fault. He finally broke. The flat recitation crumbled, and he began to sob. Not loudly, but with deep, ragged, silent gasps for air. His whole body shaking with 3 years of stored-up pain and fear. I moved from the bed and knelt on the floor in front of him. And I did the only thing a grandfather could do. I pulled him into my arms and held him while he cried, my own eyes burning. It was in that moment of raw, unvarnished grief that the bedroom door creaked open. Chloe stood there, holding a steaming mug of hot cocoa. Her face was a wreck of tear tracks and shame. She saw her son crying in my arms, and a sound escaped her, a choked little gasp of pure agony. She saw the safe harbor I had created, the one she had been unable or too afraid to provide herself. The mug trembled in her hands, its contents sloshing over the rim. She set it down on the dresser and seemed to crumple in on herself. I'm sorry, she whispered to the floor. Daddy, I'm so sorry. My anger towards her had vanished, burned away by the horror of Caleb's story and replaced by an immense, weary pity. I saw her not as a collaborator, but as another victim, trapped in the same web. He told me I couldn't do it on my own, she said, her words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush. After I lost my job, he took control of all the bank accounts. He gives me an allowance. Like a child. He said no one would ever want me, that I was lucky he put up with me. He told me I was a terrible mother and that he was the only thing protecting the kids from my incompetence. If I fought back, he'd take Emmy. He'd disappear, and I'd never see her again. I was so scared. I'm still so scared. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for an understanding I wasn't sure I could give. I thought if I just kept the peace, if I just didn't make waves, he would be okay. Sometimes, as so charming, he can be so good. I kept thinking that man would come back. I looked from my broken daughter to my traumatized grandson, and in that moment, a cold, hard clarity settled over me. The path forward wasn't just clear, it was the only one possible. The time for keeping the peace was over. It was time to make waves. It was time to bring the storm. I let go of Caleb and stood up. I looked at Chloe, and my voice was quiet, but it held the unshakable weight of a final decision. Get his things. I said, a bag. Just the essentials. Both of you are coming with me. Tonight? Chloe's eyes widened in terror. We can't. Mark will. Mark will do nothing. I cut her off. The time for being afraid of what Mark will do is over. Go on now. Do it. Something in my tone, some finality she hadn't heard in years, seemed to get through to her. She hesitated for only a second more before nodding, a flicker of her old self returning. She scurried out of the room to her own, and I helped Caleb pack a duffel bag with a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and the worn-out books from his nightstand. 15 minutes later, we walked down the stairs. It wasn't a retreat. It felt like a march. He was waiting for us at the bottom, exactly as I knew he would be. He was blocking the hallway that led to the shattered front door. His body, a physical barricade. He had his phone in his hand, held up as if it were a weapon. His earlier indignation had morphed into a cold, reptilian smile. He thought he had anticipated our every move. He thought he held the final winning card. And just where do you think you're going? He asked, his voice dripping with mock concern. We're leaving, I said simply, positioning myself slightly in front of Chloe and Caleb. I don't think so. He sneered. Chloe is my wife. Caleb is my stepson, a minor in my care for all intents and purposes. You try to take them out of my house, and I will call the police. He held the phone up higher. I'll tell them my senile, unstable father-in-law broke into my home and is trying to kidnap my family. Who do you think they'll believe? Old man. He had it all figured out. In his mind, the story was perfect. He was the victim. I was the aggressor. He watched me, waiting for me to back down, to be cowed by his threat. I looked at his smug face, at the absolute certainty in his eyes, and I felt a profound, almost serene sense of calm descend upon me. He thought he was threatening me with the police. He didn't understand. The police were no longer a threat. They were the plan. I took one more step forward, closing the distance between us, and looked him directly in the eye. Good, I said, my voice quiet, even, and utterly devoid of fear. Call them. Let's get them over here. Let's tell them everything. My words, quiet and sure, landed in the silent hallway and seemed to suck all the remaining air out of the room. Good. Call them. For the first time since I had shattered his front door, I saw a flicker of genuine uncertainty in Mark's eyes. It was a brief, almost imperceptible crack in his armor of arrogance. He had expected me to argue, to threaten, to back down. He had expected a shouting match between two old bucks. A fight. He was certain he could win through sheer force of will. He had not expected calm, quiet acceptance. He had not expected his ultimate weapon to be welcomed as a tool of liberation. His momentary confusion was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. He stared at me, his brain clearly scrambling to recalculate, to find a new script. The reptilian smile faltered on his lips. Beside me, I felt Chloe tensheup, a small, sharp intake of breath. This was not how she had envisioned this playing out. For her, the police were an ending, a catastrophe. She couldn't yet see that they were the only possible beginning. His hesitation lasted only a few seconds. Arrogance, like a noxious weed, grows back quickly. He reassembled his mask of righteous indignation, his expression hardening. He thought I was bluffing. He believed, in his core, that the world was built to favor men like him, men with nice houses, stable jobs, and a carefully constructed image of normalcy. "Fine," he hissed, his voice a low snarl. He jabbed a finger at his phone's screen, his movements jerky and aggressive. "You asked for it. Old man, don't blame me when they haul you out of here in the back of a squad car." He held the phone to his ear. A transformation occurred. The snarling rage vanished, replaced by a high, panicked tremor. It was a masterful performance. "Yes. Hello, Novicentowndici. I need help. My father-in-law. He's broken into my house. He's trying to kidnap my stepson. My wife is terrified. Please. You have to hurry." I stood my ground, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Did I just make the biggest mistake of my life, or did I just save theirs? The two possibilities warred within me. I looked at Caleb, who was watching the scene with wide, vacant eyes, as if he were observing a play that had nothing to do with him. I looked at Chloe, who was pale as death, her hand clutching her son's arm in a desperate grip, and I knew, win or lose, there was no other choice. We had passed the point of no return. The wait was the longest 10 minutes of my life. The house was utterly silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the living room, a sound that usually meant comfort and home, but now sounded like a bomb counting down. Mark stood by the doorway, a sentinel guarding his violated kingdom. He didn't speak, just glared at me with pure, undiluted hatred. Then, we heard it, a distant, mournful sirene, growing steadily louder as it sliced through the quiet, snowy night. The sound was a promise and a threat all at once. Red and blue lights began to pulse through the picture window, strobing across the walls, painting our silent, tense faces in the colors of emergency. The pristine white snow on the lawn was awash in a psychedelic proto-May. Silent scream. This perfect suburban street was no longer peaceful. It was now a scene. A squad car pulled into the driveway. Two officers emerged, their dark uniforms, a stark contrast to the snow. One was young, with a sharp, angular face and an air of, by the book, impatience. The other was older, thicker around the middle, with a face full of weary lines and eyes that had seen too many nights like this one. It was the older one who gave me a flicker of hope. He looked like a man who knew the difference between a story and the truth. They crunched up the snowy walk, their expressions grim. The older one, his name tag read Kowski, took in the splintered doorframe with a practiced eye. The younger one, Rhymes, had his hand resting near his sidearm. Mark immediately launched into Act 2 of his performance. He met them at the threshold, his hands raised in a gesture of placating civility. His voice was a masterpiece of controlled distress. "Officers, thank God you're here. I'm so sorry you had to be called out on Thanksgiving." He gestured towards me. "This is my father-in-law, Wendell. I think he might be having some kind of episode." He showed up unannounced, broke down my door, and is now trying to force my wife and stepson to leave with him. He's been confused lately. We've been worried." He delivered the lines with such sincerity, such loving concern, that for a terrifying moment, I almost believed him myself. He was painting a picture of me as a senile, dangerous old man, a tragic figure to be pitied and contained. He was using my age, my grief over Martha, as a weapon against me. Officer Rhyme, the younger one, turned his sharp gaze on me. "Sir, is that true? Did you break down this door?" I met his gaze without flinching. My voice, when I spoke, was calm and factual. I knew that shouting would only prove Mark's point. "Yes, I did," I said. "Because my grandson was locked outside on the porch, the temperature is 40 degrees. He was wearing a t-shirt. His mother and stepfather were inside, eating Thanksgiving dinner." I paused, letting the simple, brutal facts land. He had been out there for more than 4 hours. I saw a flicker of something in Kowski's weary eyes. He looked from me to Caleb, who was still huddled in the armchair, then to Chloe, who looked like she was about to faint. Mark jumped back in, his voice smooth as oil. "That is a gross exaggeration. Officer, my stepson, Caleb, is 18 years old. He shirked his responsibilities, burned part of our dinner, and was asked to spend some time outside to cool off and think about his actions. It's called discipline. My father-in-law is from a different generation. He doesn't understand." It was brilliant. He was twisting parental cruelty into a generational misunderstanding. Rhymes, the young cop, visibly relaxed. He sighed, flipping open a small notebook. "Okay, look," he said, his tone dismissive. "It's Thanksgiving. Emotions are running high. This sounds like a family dispute that got out of hand. Sir." He looked at me. "You can't be breaking down doors. And you?" He nodded at Mark. "Maybe locking your kid outside in the snow isn't the best parenting move. Why don't we all just agree to calm down for the night?" A wave of cold despair washed over me. It was happening. They were buying it. He was going to get away with it. I saw the triumphant smirk return to Mark's face. He had won. The system was working for him, just as he always knew it would. But the older officer, Kowski, hadn't moved. He hadn't written a single word in his notebook. He was still watching Chloe. He had seen 1,000 domestic disputes, and his eyes recognized the scent of real fear. He ignored his partner. He ignored Mark. He took one step into the room, and his voice, when he spoke, was quiet and gentle, but carried an undeniable weight of authority. He addressed Chloe directly. "Ma'am." Chloe jumped, startled. "Ma'am, I want you to look at me," Kowski said, his voice soft. "I'm not going to ask who's right or who's wrong. I'm not interested in the turkey or the argument. I just have one simple question for you. A yes or a no is all I need. Ma'am, do you and your children feel safe in this house?" The question hung in the air, a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. Everything stopped. The ticking of the clock seemed to fall silent. Mark shot Chloe a look of pure, venomous warning, a look that said, "Don't you dare." Chloe stood frozen, trapped between the glare of her husband and the steady, patient gaze of the police officer. Her whole body was trembling. I could see the war raging inside her, years of fear and intimidation battling against a desperate, flickering spark of maternal instinct. I held my breath. My entire life, my entire purpose, seemed to narrow down to this single pivotal moment. She looked at Mark's furious face. Then she looked at Caleb, her son, huddled and broken in the chair. And then, finally, she looked at me. In my eyes, she didn't see judgment or anger. She just saw her father, waiting. And something inside her, finally, irrevocably, broke. "No," she whispered. The word so quiet, it was barely a breath. Mark took a threatening step towards her. "Chloe." "No," she said again, louder this time, her voice gaining strength as she fed the spark of courage. She looked directly at Officer Kowski. And the truth. The whole, ugly, 3-year truth came pouring out of her. "No. We're not safe." He locked him out. It wasn't to cool off. It was for hours. And it's not the first time. He puts him in the garage when it's cold. He locks him in the basement. He withholds food. He controls everything. The money, the car, who I can talk to. I'm so scared of him. We're all so scared. The words were a torrent, a dam of silence bursting apart. As she spoke, Caleb seemed to draw strength from her, slowly, deliberately. He stood up from the armchair. He pulled back the sleeve of his sweatshirt, revealing the mottled, faded bruises on his upper arm and wrist. He looked at the officers, his voice quiet but steady. The first time I'd heard him speak with anything but fear. "This," he said, pointing to the marks. "This is from when he pulls me to the basement door. From last month." That was it. The final, physical punctuation mark on Chloe's testimony. The mask on Mark's face didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. The calm, reasonable man vanished, and the monster I'd known was lurking underneath was finally revealed. "Lies," he screamed, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. He lunged towards Chloe. "You ungrateful bitch, I gave you everything. You're nothing without me." He never reached her. In an instant, Kowski and Rhymes moved, their professional calm exploding into swift, decisive action. They intercepted him, spun him around, and slammed him against the wall. The sound of his body hitting the drywall echoed through the house. "You have the right to remain silent," Rhymes grunted, forcing Mark's arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs snapping shut was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of justice, the sound of freedom. Mark was still screaming, a torrent of abuse and denials. A wild animal caught in a trap. They read him his rights as he struggled, a pathetic, impotent display of fury. The performance was over. Only the rage was left. As they dragged him out the shattered door and into the flashing lights, he twisted his head back, his eyes locking onto me. The hatred in them was a physical force. "You've destroyed this family." "Wendell," he shrieked, his voice hoarse. "You'll regret this for the rest of your life." Then he turned his gaze to Chloe, his face a contorted mask of pure venom. "You did this. Chloe, you hear me. You destroyed your own family. You'll come crawling back to me. You'll have nothing." The heavy thud of the squad car door slamming shut cut off his tirade. The siren started up again. A different sound. Now, not a warning, but a departure. We watched the red and blue lights pull away, painting the trees and houses as they went, until they turned the corner and were gone. And then, there was silence. A deep, profound, and blessedly empty silence, broken only by Chloe's soft, ragged sobs of relief, and the quiet, Steady ticking of the clock. The slam of the squad car door echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence of the house. For a moment, the only sounds were the ticking of the grandfather clock and the ragged, gulping sobs of my daughter. The flashing red and blue light slid across the walls one last time, then swept out of the room, leaving us in the dim, ordinary light of the dining room. The storm had passed, leaving behind a wreck. We stood there, the three of us, adrift in the aftermath. The magnificent Thanksgiving feast sat cold and untouched on the table, a monument to a lie. The shattered wineglass still lay on the floor, a splash of dark red that looked unnervingly like blood. A cold draft snaked in through the broken front door, a constant reminder of the violence that had breached these walls. It felt wrong to stay here another second. This wasn't a home, it was a crime scene, haunted by the ghost of a family that had never really existed. My gaze fell on my youngest granddaughter, Emmy, who was standing in the doorway to the living room, a stuffed rabbit clutched in her small hand. She had witnessed the whole ugly affair, her face a pale, confused mask. Chloe followed my gaze, and a fresh wave of pain washed over her features. She knelt down, her movements stiff and exhausted. "Mommy," Emmy whispered, her voice tiny. Is Daddy coming back?" Chloe pulled her into a fierce hug, burying her face in her daughter's hair. "Daddy had to go away for a while." "Sweetie," she choked out, the words tasting like ash. "But we're going to go on a trip. We're going to visit Grandpa." I knew then that my work wasn't finished. I had been the battering ram, the one to break down the door. Now, I had to be the builder. "Go get her coat," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "and a few of her things, just enough for a few days." I looked at Caleb, who was standing silently, the blanket still draped over his shoulders like a royal mantle. "Son, would you do me a favor and grab that duffel bag you packed?" They moved with the slow, dazed obedience of shock survivors. While they were upstairs, I walked through the house, turning off lights, creating darkness where there had been a false, blazing warmth. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt a profound, bone-deep weariness, and a desperate urge to get my family to safety. The drive back to Michigan was a long, silent pilgrimage through the dark. The snow had softened to a gentle flurry, each flake a tiny speck of peace in the headlights. Chloe and Emmy were huddled in the back seat, Emmy finally asleep with her head in her mother's lap. Caleb sat beside me in the passenger seat, staring out at the dark, snow-dusted fields rolling past. The box with the baseball glove and the comic book sat at his feet, a forgotten promise from what felt like a different lifetime. The silence in the truck was nothing like the tense suffocating silence of Mark's house. This was a healing silence, a quiet space for wounds to begin to close. I'd glance in the rearview mirror, seeing the faint outline of my daughter's face, the way she stroked her sleeping child's hair, and I saw the first fragile signs of her return. In the profile of my grandson beside me, I saw the hard, tense lines around his jaw begin to soften. We were refugees, fleeing Avajone, and the old, rumbling F-150 was our vessel, carrying us toward a distant, unknown shore of peace. When we finally pulled into my driveway hours later, the world was bathed in the soft, pre-dawn light of a new day. My small house, with its familiar, sagging porch and warm, yellow light in the window, had never looked so much like a sanctuary. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't grand. But it was real, and it was safe. That first night, they slept, the sleep of the utterly exhausted. I made up the beds in the guest room with the clean ache, lavender-scented sheets that Martha had so loved. I brewed a pot of tea that nobody drank. I sat in my worn armchair in the living room, the same one I'd sat in every night for 40 years. And I listened to the quiet, even breathing of a house that was, once again, full. For the first time since Martha had passed, the silence didn't feel like an absence. It felt like a presence. It felt like peace. 4 months passed. The deep snows of that Thanksgiving winter melted away, revealing the determined green shoots of spring. The world outside my workshop window, once a landscape of gray and white, was now alive with the chirping of robins and the scent of damp, thawing earth. The change on the outside was a mirror for the quiet transformation happening within my walls. My house, once a silent monument to the past, was now filled with the gentle hum of a new life. It was in the small things, the scent of Chloe's coffee brewing in the morning, the sound of Emmy's laughter as she drew pictures at the kitchen table, the sight of Caleb, bent over a physics textbook, his brow furrowed in concentration, not fear. We had found a new rhythm, a quiet, unassuming routine built on mutual support and unspoken understanding. The legal storm had played out with a grim predictability, faced with the testimony of his wife, his stepson, and the evidence from the neighbor's security camera that the police had later obtained. Mark had accepted a plea bargain. He was serving time for child endangerment and domestic abuse charges. He was a ghost, a bad memory that was already starting to fade. Chloe, with a quiet determination I hadn't seen in her for years, was finalizing their divorce. She'd found a part-time, remote accounting job, and with every invoice she processed, I could see a piece of her old confidence returning. She was balancing her own books now, in every sense of the word. One bright Saturday afternoon, I was in the kitchen, oiling the worn wood of the cutting board. When Caleb came in and sat down at the table, he pushed a university course catalog across the table towards me. I was looking at this. He said, I saw he had it open to the College of Engineering, a full scholarship to Ohio State already secured. It was a golden ticket, a path out. But his finger was tracing the columns of a different page, the College of Social Work. I'm still thinking about engineering, he said, anticipating my question. But, after that night, after everything, I keep thinking about all the other kids. The ones who don't have a grandfather who's crazy enough to kick down a door, the ones who are still whispering their stories into a pillow because they think no one is coming to help. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were clear and full of a purpose I'd never seen before. I think I want to be the person who comes. I felt a surge of pride so powerful it almost buckled my knees. The monster he'd lived with had tried to break him, to make him small and silent. Instead, he had forged Caleb's pain into a shield, and his suffering into a sword. He was going to be a warrior. Not of comic book fantasy, but of the real, messy, human world. I think, I said, my voice thick with emotion, that your grandmother would have been incredibly proud of that. Later that evening, after Chloe had tucked Emmy into bed, she and I sat on the back porch, watching the last of the sunlight bleed from the sky. For a long time, we just sat in comfortable silence, a thing that had been impossible between us for years. I'm sorry, Dad, she said finally, her voice soft, I'm sorry I let it go on for so long. I was so lost. I let him convince me that I was weak. He didn't convince you, I said, looking out at the emerging stars. He just made you forget how strong you were. You remembered. Chloe. When it mattered most, you remembered. I saw my daughter again. Not the terrified, trembling woman from that Thanksgiving night, but the resilient, intelligent, loving woman I had raised. She was finding her way back to herself. I stayed out on the porch long after she went inside. I picked up a block of scrap wood and an old carving knife, and I let my hands work as I thought about Martha. I could almost feel her presence beside me. Her quiet approval, a warmth against the cool spring air. You did good, Wendell. I could hear her say, you held the anchor. You brought them home. Just as I was about to go inside, the screen door creaked open and Caleb stepped out, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to me and sat down in the other rocking chair, the one that had sat empty for so long. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the fireflies begin to blink in the growing dark. Grandpa, he said, his voice quiet but steady. Thank you for what I asked, though I knew. That night, he said, looking at me, you didn't just save me from the cold. You saved my life. I looked at this remarkable young man, this survivor who was turning his scars into a roadmap to help others. I thought of the lonely, quiet years I had spent in this house, rattling around with my memories. A man whose purpose had felt finished. No, son, I said, my voice hoarse. You saved mine. You reminded me what a family is for. It's not about perfect dinners or pretending everything is okay. It's about kicking down the damn door when someone you love is freezing on the other side. He smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. We sat there together, the old carpenter and the young warrior, watching the stars come out. 2 generations of a family that had been shattered, and was now, piece by painful piece, being rebuilt, not into what it was before, but into something stronger, truer, and forged in the fire of a terrible Thanksgiving. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that we were going to be okay.